Yeah, now moving from one OTT media owner to another, we've got Andy Meikle, who's the founder and CEO of Recast, which allows rights owners to go direct to consumer on their platform to monetize on demand and live streams using microtransactions. He's joined by Debra Gawrych and Marcus Luer. And I'd like to hand you back now to Katie Traxton to introduce the panel on media tech to meet the demands of fans. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you very much, Ben. Hi, I'm glad to be back, everybody, and glad to be joined by 3 more fantastic new speakers. So, without further ado, here they are. I would like to take 2 minutes to introduce them, and then we will get stuck into the topic in question. So, you are watching Host City Americas, where events and tech meet. This is the second panel of the day on media tech to meet the demands of fans. Content is king, but only if it reaches audiences on their own terms. What do consumers want, and how can major events meet those needs? Can online gaming and other fan engagement schemes reduce the financial risk for hosts? We hope to answer all of that and more, or at least give you a very, very interesting perspective. And with me, they're going to give you a little wave as I introduce them. I've got Debra Gawrych, Secretary General of the International Federation of Sport Climbing. I have Andy Meikle, founder and CEO of Recast. And Marcus Luer, CEO and founder of Total Sports Asia. I am newly, if you've just tuned in, or still, if you were tuned in earlier this morning, Katie Traxton. I'm a board director of the European Sponsorship Association and founder of sports and entertainment talent agency, Good Vibes Only Talent. Thank you for joining us. Now, the panel, the proposition is media tech that meets the demands of fans. But actually, before we talk about what fans want, we want to talk about whether media tech should be driven by the demands of fans. Yes, designed for fans. Yes, taking into account the audience, of course. Yes, targeting always. But should it purely be driven by what the fans want? Or if we're innovating, like these 3 fantastic panelists are, should there be another insight, another instinct that is driving some of the choices made by businesses? And Andy, I'm going to come to you first, just as a reward for that beautiful view of Edinburgh Castle.
Thanks very much. I think it's a really interesting question in terms of whether we should be driving innovation to give the fan what they want without them knowing necessarily, or delivering solutions that delivers something to the fan that they want and need. There's obviously a lot of talk about things like the metaverse, etc. But for Recast, whilst we're often people often describe us as being quite disruptive, I actually don't think we are disruptive at all. I think that there's evolving consumption and payment patterns that we've seen accelerate certainly throughout the pandemic, and with more fans cutting the cord, increasing fragmentation, and subscription fatigue setting in, Recast as a micropayment solution, it's regarded in some ways as being innovative, but I actually think we're just providing a solution that that gives fans greater access to the content they want to watch. Now, as was touched on there at the tail end of the last fireside chat, I think it's so important to make sure that we're driving revenue. We can't continue to sink money into content and engagement if it's not actually delivering returns and it's sustainable. And so for us, certainly the solution that we've created, I'll reiterate, I don't actually see it as being very disruptive, but more of a solution to the disruption that we've seen take place over the past few years, in particular with how fans are paying and consuming content.
Now, Marcus, Andy touched upon effective monetization, and I know this is something that you want to talk to us about, and you have some secrets to reveal. Over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Now, firstly, I'll just add a little bit to what Andy just said, and that is, I think the whole concept of we have to create tech to meet the demands of fans is probably a bit the other way around. Let's take TikTok as an example. I don't think anyone needed TikTok. I think we all had, we're able to live our lives without it. At the same time, someone did create it, and obviously certain versions of that now around the world, and it's been hugely successful. And on the back of it, there's a whole new form of content being created. and people generate revenue streams. And I think that's also what Andy then touched on, is really always about what is it really, what we should be looking at, how you eventually can make money. And there's, many forms, from the basic, subscription to, of course, certain forms of advertising driven models. The part you're touching on, what I was sort of was going to say earlier a bit, is really, when we look at things, I look at it not just from a tech point of view, but what is it? How can you shift things where in some sense it's so obvious? And one of my favorite example is Manchester United, a club we do quite a bit of work with on many other ways. We're actually going to have them here in Thailand in a few weeks for a match. And so if you look at their presentation, you'll see they will claim, or they have statistics which show they have 1.1 billion fans globally. Their revenue as a club is about, I think, $700 million US. It went down a bit during COVID. I think a couple of years ago it was about 800 million. So let's say, if we use just really simple math, you have a billion fans paying, and you generate $700 or $800 million. That's 70 cents to 80 cents ARPU, if you want to use that as a simple way of analyzing what you're generating right now from your customer, right? Now, we've done this sort of anecdotal research many times. If you would go to the average Man United fans anywhere in the world, saying, would you pay $1 for a subscription service which would allow you to watch the games of the club and have some usual additional other services or other content around it? Would $1 be okay for you to pay per month, not per game, per month? Most people would say yes. So it gets delivered on your phone or whichever other device you'd like. Now let's go back to the numbers here. If you have a billion fans, let's forget about the billion. Let's use half of that, or 60% of those fans would really sign up with. They would generate the same amount of money they do for the entire year per month now. So those are dramatic shifts when you start thinking that way. Now, at the same time, we can counter argue that it would completely mess up the Premier League, TV models and all the other things which come with it. I get that. So that's not the point of the conversation, maybe, but I just want to throw that out. How, if you think completely out of the box and away from what the model is right now, how you could truly monetize sports, especially sports which have these large global followings, in a completely different way. And that's obviously the whole point of this conversation.
Okay, so let's think about, because I want to hear from Debra. So let's think about the fact that when we talk about media tech, we're talking in broad terms about how we deliver through technology the content, could be sport, entertainment, whatever, to the fans. And nowadays, as we heard from Andy about micropayments, etc., the fans have more opportunities to hold us to account in terms of delivering interesting content, because they can literally vote with their money on whether something is engaging or not, and they want to keep engaging with it. So Debra, you've done something really remarkable. You've been right at the forefront of a bid to bring a new sport to the Olympics. And when I say a new sport, I mean new in the context of the Olympics. It's not a new sport. Sport climbing has been around as long as sport and people have been around, but it's now come to the Olympics. And presumably, when you are making the case for why that should be an accredited Olympic sport, you need to justify why people are going to want to watch it, as well as participate in it, and why it's so relevant. How did you go about it, and what is the secret to making that compelling argument?
Thank you, Katie. That's a lot to answer in a simple question, but I have been thinking about it. And by the way, I really enjoyed the first panel, and then really listening to Andy and Matt, or Marcus, I'm sorry, talk. What's interesting to me is the whole question about tech and how climbing has been altered because of the Olympic presence, which is awesome, but it's also difficult. So, climbing is it's a basic movement. And you're right, it's been around since the beginning of time. Sure, climbers began in the mountains, and it's been really popularized by Free Solo and Don Wall, and more recently, a climbing documentary called The Wall Climb for Gold, which is more of a sport climbing or wall climbing event, because it profiles 4 athletes that actually were on Olympians or are Olympians. And so when you think about climbing, it's a lifestyle. And there were 5 sports that were additional sports in Tokyo where we were introduced into the Olympic program. And now 3 of those sports, which are also lifestyle sports, are going to be in Paris. And sport climbing is also going to be in LA 2028, along with surfing and with skateboarding. So people like to watch them. They like to do these sports and for fun. So there are many people in the community that really don't care about competitions. I mean, it's not so dissimilar to swimming or soccer or football or anything else, but it's very much ingrained in the community. And so for climbers, it's more like in the beginning, it was a sin to monetize. And so what I wanted to just share is that I was part of a decision where we looked at monetizing and having a paywall because we provide everything free through YouTube. And we do have a major marketing agency that works with us, and we're looking at different ways of reaching our community. And they were very upset about it. So we decided not to do that. And we've kept it free right now. So it's sponsor driven. We have member driven. But that's not sustainable in the long run, as the rest of the panelists have talked about. So how do you change that? And I feel like we're stuck between an old-fashioned model and a new model that really hasn't even been fully integrated. And I believe it's multifaceted. I think that there are people who want to see elite games and see the elite athletes. There are people who just want to experience documentaries or videos, which we'll probably get into it later, which may be athlete-driven, or for us, it would be athletes that would provide that content. And there may be a place for that. But I think the really missing key is, and I don't know that this is true for some of the other elite events like Manchester United or something, but for climbing, people just like to do it. They want to go to gyms, they want to go outside, and maybe they want to watch key people doing the event or just a friend and sharing video. So I think it's possible at an international level to connect with this community on a wider platform. And the typical model for an international federation has been the IF is the governing body, and then we have national federations or countries that are members under them, and they're the ones responsible for growing the sport. And what's happening more with these lifestyle sports, surfing, for climbing, and for skateboarding, is that development isn't happening in the way that would probably be most productive internationally or even nationally. And so the International Federation is going to need to step in and do something. And certainly surfing is really amazing doing that already with the videos, and skateboarding too. But we have a great opportunity. And I think that that's some of the projects that I'm working on, and trying to figure out how we can bring the larger community in without ruining what people love about climbing, which there's a purity to that. Basic movements, you're outside, you're inside. And I'm a leadership management consultant as well. And I use this in my training and development. If you want to teach people about leadership or ascending to some other realm or trying to overcome obstacles, you climb. You go into areas that make you uncomfortable. And then you figure it out and you realize, wow, I could succeed. Maybe it wasn't pretty, but I got to the top. And so how do you capture that? And so what's happened in the Olympic program is that we had a basic model program, and we had to change it to fit into that for TV, because there were too many athletes, so we had to combine them all into one medal, and we adapted. We were flexible. But when people saw it, they said, wow, that doesn't really showcase the best athletes because you made all 3 of these disciplines together. Yes. And so slowly, it's like as people are learning it, they're seeing that there is a purity about it that's engaging to people. But I would say that we're still trying to figure out the meat part of it. But I am really dedicated to really working from the athletes. And I believe if we do that, we're going to reach people who don't climb, and they like to see this just because it shows overcoming an obstacle. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity, and thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Could I jump in? Is that okay?
Yeah. I was going to ask a question actually, but go.
Sorry, Katie. Just on the point of what Debra was, the point that she mentioned there in terms of sort of more flexibility, and I think that to Marcus's point, $1. I appreciate in basic maths how that would work, but there's a lot of people who, $1 is their daily budget for food. In fact, just recently in a council here in Scotland, they allowed people to ride the bus for free for 10 days, saving them £1 a day. And when they asked, what would you use this money for? The vast majority of people said food. I think that we really, need to think about the way in which we're able to give access, these fans access to that kind of content. And that's where I think that, as Debra touched on, sort of being stuck between two things. I mean, the ad model is lucrative for the few tech giants. And then the subscription model means that you're literally restricting the reach, because you're setting a price point and only specific individuals. And of course, there could be a larger percentage depending on your sport or your price point compared to others, but there's only a percentage of fans that are going to be able to access that. So for me, I think one of the things that certainly frustrates me, if I'm going to speak plainly, is often people talking about, sort of innovative technology and the metaverse that I touched on before. But what about the fan that absolutely adores Manchester United, but even $1 probably wouldn't work for them? They don't have TV, they're on mobile. And that's where I think that there has to be a more flexible model, and it can't be based on geography. As in, consumers, let's say in Southeast Asia and Africa, have just a different subscription price point, because also fans may not want to subscribe. I'm a Hibs fan for my sins, and when I lived abroad, I chose not to pay £180 a year for the subscription, because I don't really know how often I'd be able to tune in and what I'm going to get for that. So I think that there's obviously, the premise on which we've built Recast is really flexibility and affordability. And, within our model, fans can either opt into buying our in-app currency to make payment to consume that content on a case-by-case basis, or they can watch ads, they can share first-party data, they can engage. It's their choice. But I think that ultimately, one of the fundamental things we need to do when we're talking about sort of innovation in media is addressing the issue that many people cannot legally access content because they can't afford to do that, or it doesn't make sense for them to make that kind of commitment. And we talk about how technology can address piracy, etc. At the end of the day, there's always going to be new technology being created to overcome the solutions to piracy, and so that's an endless cycle. I think we need to get to the heart of the problem, which is affordability, and being able to give fans what they want when they want in an affordable manner.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump a bit in there and continue that on that path, if that's okay with you, Katie. Unless you wanted to switch the topic, and I think I agree with Andy. Affordability is key, and therefore having different price points. According to this, I recently on my podcast had a gentleman from the NBA who's been leading the NBA's effort here in Asia for decades. And again, we had a really deep conversation about how their different price structures for their NBA over the top, the OTT platform here, how it works, and then how it differently is priced in Asia versus maybe the US versus Europe or even Africa. So I think, again, someone like the NBA, who's always at the leading edge of things for sure, how they do it around the world is a great model. And then you have clearly examples where, if you take Netflix, I think they have a fairly flat price structure globally, and they charge more or less the same for everyone. That's on that end, Then I had someone who was managing director of Star Sports here in Asia, ESPN Star Sports, and even and he talks ARPU in numbers, which their ARPU in China was like a penny. I think in India it was 5 cents, and in Southeast Asia it was $1. So even at a traditional broadcaster platform, they had very different models of what they could charge to service providers or the platform buyers at that time, their partners here. So I think that should be a given. I'm not saying it is done that way, and I do agree that a lot of times overseas fans are milked harder because it's harder to get access to them or whatever. But it shouldn't be. It should really be driven by that. A few years ago, we were building a platform which was an OTT platform driven on blockchain, and the whole concept behind it is sort of in Andy's direction, that we wanted to have the fans vote with a token of what should be the price point. So you could pledge if you wanted to watch a particular type of sport. It was up to you to pledge what it meant to you. If you felt, hey, this is worth $100 or is it only worth $1 to me. that is all, and at the end of the day, it was all ended up being the same. But the money collected, which would sit in a vault, and which could be presented to a rights holder, was the money which was there. Right? The rights holder could say there is $100,000 sitting there, there's $1 million sitting there, and only if the rights holder says, "Sure, I'm happy to take that money," it would be released, and then automatically the fans would have access to that content. And for one guy it cost $1, the other guy it costed 100. So that is really democratization, I think, of content, what we were trying to do with this particular platform. And I think, a mixture and hybrid of that, what you can do technically already very easily just by having different price points, to, of course, something a bit more outside of the box again, using blockchain technology is maybe where things could head. Let's throw that in the mix.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback onto that. Now, it's probably because I have a whole different perspective being an international federation, but there's more to the sport than just an event. And I think that what I see, especially for our sport, but I think for any sport, is that people are really eager to know what's going on behind the scenes. They want to know more about the athletes. They want athlete profiles and interviews. They want to know more about, I know even at the Olympics, and I'm going to be doing at the upcoming World Games, as I do behind the scenes, and the sponsors love it. Everyone really loves it because they want to know what's happening. And I think that a lot of people enjoy that with, the making of a movie or something, but there's content that's beyond the events. And I think there may be a way to monetize it, but I also think it's a way to, this is the marketing stuff, but it makes it stickier for people. But it also is important for the sport because there's so many sports, so many media entertainment things are knocking at the door. And so if you can engage someone who has a real love for that, or a love for outdoors, or just thinks, Alex Honnold is cool, or Miho, or one of our athletes, Yanya Gambert. So it's like, yes, they will watch them for that reason. But I think that there's more to it. And I think that this is one of the things I would like to say, is that one of the disciplines in our sport is bouldering, and it's confusing to watch. And so we've had to really clean it up and change it, and media's helped us with that. But the purity of the sport is this: when you go out and climb outside and there's a boulder, and I'm not talking about a rope, I'm talking about scrambling on a boulder, is what you do is you look at it with your buddies and your friends and you go, okay, I think I can get to the top. And so you try it and you fall down, and you try it and you fall down, and you try it and you fall down, and you do it over and over again. And it's a problem to figure out. The other two disciplines for us are different. Lead is different. You fall, you're out. And in speed climbing, you fall and you're also out. But in bouldering, it gives you a chance to figure out the problem. And I think that there's more room for that in sports now. And I think for people and fans to engage in not the problem, but the depth of the sport, it helps us get more intimate and to learn more. I think we're hungry for that because everything is so surface soundbite. Oh, did they win? Yeah, they got the world record. Okay, fine. Everybody's a world record this, or, but what else is going on? And again, I think that with the media, it is very important to reach a community, and the grassroots community. It's one of the things that I'm really looking at for our federation. And there are many ways to do that. There are ways to have events globally, not elite events, that are low cost, that you can do it in your gym. I'm specifically speaking about climbing, but I think it applies to any sport. There's a way to engage people where they can upload video and share working on problems, and they can learn from each other. And I think that climbing, we're at the verge of that, but I think we're still missing it, at least pulling it together. And I think it's what's happened with a lot of sports is that people can't really relate to it because it's so, I know watching like NBA, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to watch the whole game. I'll watch the end of it because then they really start playing and things like that. It's like, let's not lose it because we've made everything so elite, so soundbite, and so glossy. Let's show all of the sport so that we can engage people to really be active in it. And that's what I think we're hungry for as well, is people are becoming more just AI and esports. And I love esports. I think they're great. But also getting out and actually doing it are important, and engaging them and doing that, I think, is an important element.
Absolutely. And I think also...
Sorry, I got on my soapbox.
No, not at all. But it draws on a kind of bigger point, right? About the mental level in which fans nowadays particularly younger generation fans, want to engage in sport as well as just the kind of observational or physical level. And this, I think, ties into the slight cult of personality, the desire to see what's going on behind the scenes, the documentaries, the drive to survive, like whatever it might be. It's a different, more holistic level of wanting to connect through the media tech that the fans have, rather than just, and we all love it, but just observing the kind of sporting action. But one of the things I wanted to come back to with you, Andy, is one of my favorite things about sport, probably my favorite thing about sport, is how unifying it is. And yes, there are barriers to entry to certain sports, but as a fan, it's something that no matter who we are or where we're from, if we get access to live sport or virtual sport, it can get our blood pumping, it can be pure escapism, and we can get really stuck in. And obviously you were talking quite a bit about flexibility, about affordability, with that inclusivity, accessibility. Sports fans can be any age from anywhere. And so I can imagine, because even at my grand old age, I could look at new ways of content being delivered to me and go, I like it the way it was. This was fine for me and my buddies, right? I don't even want to get involved in dual screening, let alone finding a new way to digest it. But actually, when I look into Recast, it's not complicating the equation at all, is it? It's actually simplifying it and allowing each of us to have exactly what we want, kind of like when we want it.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly think that there is a fan who wants to be able to dive into the data as the event is ongoing, and they want to access a live chat and engage with others, and that's certainly important to be able to address that. But as I touched on before, it's more about sort of taking a step back and just thinking about the entry point. I think what Debra touched on there, it's so important to particularly leverage the reach of the athletes themselves, who have and that's across any sport, who have a reach and an influence, and you've got to start at the top of the funnel with social media, maximum reach, and then what is sort of filters down to typically a subscription model. And so, I, with all due respect, Debra, I've not watched much climbing, but I'd imagine probably the journey that I'm going to go on to be captured as and become a climbing fan is probably seeing something that's pretty mind-boggling or fascinating on social media. But for me to continue to engage with that over and over and over, to then end up becoming, let's say, a subscriber or subscribing to a specific broadcaster who has purchased your rights, that's a big leap from me being interested and intrigued with what I've seen and quite liking the look of that, to then actually parting with my subscription dollar, up against, of course, everything else, the big ones such as Disney, Netflix, etc. And then there's every other sport and every other athlete who's considering having their own direct-to-consumer OTT platform. So there's a lot of competition out there. And so the point I'm stressing here is that there's a place for everything, and certainly continue to engage on social. But as you're pulling people down, allow them to just simply engage with content, and there may be a value there, as we're seeing through micropayments. And those who really bought into it then can going on to, let's say, more sort of a subscription offering. And also the way in which you deliver that content can go through that channel as well. It may be that there's a docu-series that's been created that will first go on your subscription offering, as an example, so that those who are subscribing get it first and foremost, and then it drips down into a pay-as-you-go, more flexible model so that everybody still has access to it. And then it goes out on social media just to reach the wider audience and engage with them. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It will still reach other people, but you're maximizing monetization potential. But in terms of breaking out and having, sort of shared screens and all the data in there, etc., those are important things to introduce. But for now, as you touched on in terms of Recast, and all of these things are certainly a part of our product roadmap, and the way in which that in-app currency can be used to unlock different layers of information and data and engagements, and be rewarded for that in turn. And going back to the word that Marcus used, democratization, that is the heart of what we're doing. But first and foremost, provide the fans with compelling content and place a value on it. It is a product. I think we've gone on this social media journey over the past, let's say, 10, 15 years or so, and we somehow believe that content should just be free. There is a willingness for fans to pay. We look at platforms like Twitch, and fans are donating and making significant donations. So it's not that there's not a willingness, but I think it's about providing that flexibility, and also standing by the strength of your product and knowing that there is a value there. And the same way that you go and sell a jersey at the club store at a football stadium, there is an investment that has to be made in delivering this content. And some you'll assign to marketing, some you'll assign to being a product itself, and you have to look at the most flexible ways to monetize that.
And you said the word unlock, which brings me on to, I'm going to move to Marcus a second about user-generated content and gamification that draws in kind of younger audiences, etc. I mean, my only concern about Recast is that the way you're describing it, it sounds like I could become completely addicted to what you're doing and lose all of the rest of life. But I'm sure I can cross that bridge when I come to it. Marcus, I am keen to talk about we say the fan of the future, but I actually think they're here. I'm keen to talk about this fan of the future who goes about their life in a different way. And therefore they will absorb content through media tech in a different way. And I know that part of your business is working with people like Debra in rights holders to make sure that they see profitability from their sports. What do you think we should be looking out for this next generation of fans coming through?
Right. Yeah, I want to come a bit from the angle of engagement. I think Andy mentioned the word a few times as well. I think the monetization part we obviously touched on, and there are all these different models we sort of described a bit already. To me, the question you're asking really right now is how do we engage that fan further, right? How do we get them into the sport? And that's where I see sports tech or tech in general can play a huge role, whether it's AR, VR, which I think is an amazing type of technology, which I'm not saying for every sport, where you can see it very easily for certain sports, being closer to the action, having the ability to sit courtside and make it you looks like your view is like the VIPs sitting there, the celebrities in the NBA game, or you're sitting ringside in a boxing event or UFC fight, or being as close as possible to the action on whatever field and pitch you maybe we're talking about here. I think those things are just another level. That's one. We touch a bit on betting, which obviously is going gangbusters in the US now. That is a form of engagement. We can all claim it's not whatever. There can be an unhealthy part to it. That's again not part of the conversation so much here, but it's an important part how fans do further engage with a sport when they have a chance to wager on it in the right way, in a controlled way. So in-game betting and all those tools which are there. So I'm a big believer that the tech side, which is coming there, and whether it's AR, VR, betting, or certain other personalization elements there, which are out there. The part I love, for example, is, this is a personal example here. I'm German, and for the last 25 years living out here in Asia, every single international football game I'm watching where my team plays, I have an English commentary. Now, that's sometimes they can be a little biased towards my team, so I would rather listen to either, of course, a German commentary, which is never going to be available out here, or someone who again doesn't maybe has that sort of usual view. So in gaming and esports, you see a lot of that, where you see recasting or recasters who bringing in their own viewpoint, and you might have someone who is more in line with your view. So all those things should be available. I shouldn't be forced to listen to a particular set of commentators if there is a choice of 10 others who could do a better job or speak in my language or whatever it maybe is. And so all those things, which again is engagement and personalization, is probably the key here. I feel is where the sport needs to be. And it might not be, there's still plenty of folks who are very happy to watch it in a very traditional way in front of a TV with a remote in their hand. And that's fantastic. And that should always be there. And then you got obviously millions of younger generations or others who will only be watching things on their phone. My son barely knows how to switch a TV on anymore. So I think that's, sport needs to be catering to that. We touch a bit on esports, which is grabbing a big slice of the action for that younger generation. And I think if sport doesn't pay attention to some of that, how they consume that type of content, we might be a little left behind. Not now, but in the long run.
Well, we're going to hear from a gamer very shortly, and I'm sure he'll be a massive advocate for YouTube and all kinds of other social media. But before I come to Debra for what's probably going to be the final question, Andy, I want to talk to you because I'm going to ask Debra's perspective on what you and Marcus have told us about working with rights holders. You have an interesting case study about the World Curling Federation, I think, and how you've worked with them and the difference they saw when they moved to working with Recast. Could you tell our audience today a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. For us, so Recast has been in beta for just over a year and a bit now, working with just shy of 200 channels. And one of those is World Curling Federation. They approached us in November, in fact, just before one of their key events for the year. They were coming up with the European Championships and World Cup qualifiers as well. And they typically have live streamed that on YouTube, and generated zero revenue from the viewership. And so it was only 24 hours. I think it was only 24 hours before the event was to start, and they'd heard about Recast, got in touch. And on Recast, it only takes a matter of minutes to set up a channel for our rights holders. There's no upfront or ongoing costs. And the next day, they sent an email out to members, and they had viewers coming in from 37 countries, and have since had 5 events hosted on Recast. They're also leveraging the reach of the other national federations, etc., because on Recast there's what we call the incentivized sharing model. Whether I, as a fan, share a link for someone to come and consume an on-demand or live stream, I get rewarded with credits, which reduces my consumption cost. But also the other federations who are sharing a link to consume the content as a verified publisher generate revenue, which is shared between them and the original publisher. But the point being that over the past 5 events, since they approached us, and many live events and also on-demand content, the maximum they've been charging is 50 credits. That's our in-app currency, CAS credits, which is the equivalent of 50 pence. And they've made just short of £60,000. That's 90,000 transactions with live, and I think it's just short of 30,000 on demand. And so for them, they've already made decisions to start making more investments into covering other sheets, and it could be just one camera without commentary. But at the end of the day, it's okay. The fan just wants to be able to watch their team, Scotland, against, let's say, Canada. So I think it's a great case study, because it's a, with the greatest respect to them, obviously it's more of a niche sport, a smaller sport, although a large and dedicated following. And so for other rights holders, rights owners, with a similar reach and dedicated following, it gives them an idea of what they're capable of generating. But also for the larger organizations across the world of sport, and some of the biggest rights owners in the world we're in discussion with, who have their own OTT platform, and I obviously won't name them, but they hit the ceiling at a couple 100,000 subscribers, which is fine. But then what about the other 99.9%? And that's where there's an opportunity across the board for all rights holders to be able to effectively monetize without forcing a fan into a decision on a subscription offering, basically. So it's been a great case study, and I'm very thankful that they have given us permission to talk to it.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. So we only have a few minutes. This always happens. Time always passes far too quickly, apart from when you don't want it to in life. We have a question here, which is, how best to grow audiences? Is this down to the reach of the rights holder or the media owner? And I'd like to take that question and basically just say to you, Debra, also in the context of what Marcus and Andy have shared, in terms of engaging fans, existing fans, or new audiences, what is the partnership as a rights holder that you look for with media owners or with agencies or anybody else you might be working with to grow your sport?
Well, it's a strategic decision, I would say. I mean, we recently signed with Eurosports Discovery Channel, and so we're working with them now. I think the best combination is a partnership, was what you just said. We don't always find that, because the traditional broadcasting forms don't really feel like they need a smaller sport like ours, although everybody kind of wants it now. They're really intrigued by it. And so I think the more people find out about it, the more they like it. And I think what Andy shared is spot on. Why would you want to spend money and engage unless there's some more value add? There's a lot of competing interests. So it has to be a partnership. I mean, we really wanted to have more exposure with NBC in the US, and we haven't seen that yet. But what we want to do is work with broadcasters, with OTT platforms that appreciate our sport and want to help us grow. And I'm so excited to hear about Andy's story about curling. Curling is a good friend of ours. They're an amazing federation. We really appreciate, I know their president. And it's really awesome. And you can be sure that I'm going to go back and talk to our president's cabinet and the council about what you just shared. And at the same time, there are certain strategic things that you have to do in order to be viable as an IOC sport. So it's hard. It's a dance. It's a balance. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all of you for your time today. I'm sure lots of people will be going and looking up more about all of your different organisations, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope to see you at Host City soon. As Ben has been mentioning during the day, Host City Glasgow will be taking place in the middle of November later this year. I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of Host City Americas, and if they could hear you, I'm sure there would be a loud round of applause for our panellists now. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Katie, and to all of our panelists there. And to find out more about Recast, I do strongly recommend that you visit their exhibition booth. Now, if you go to the homepage, the lobby, click on Exhibit Hall and sponsors, and just click on the Recast logo there. You can chat with Andy's team and find out more about it. And thank you so much, Katie there, Deborah, Marcus. And we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back at 10 minutes to the hour, wherever you are, for the Q&A with Callum Knight, who's a gamer, goes by the name of CPK. Katie will be joining us again to introduce Callum. So see you then. Thanks.